as well, but I'll probably start with the other one. Okay, yeah, we're just a short announcement about the rota. We've put the rota in the chats, I think. So if everybody looks at that and gets back to me this week, if they want to do some changes, I think it might have been put down that Manjit was preaching in this session. We might put him down to do another day, I think, because I noticed he's not on it. But yeah, we're trying to share the work of the children. So, and we're recording this session, yeah. Yeah, okay. Okay, let's start with a silent prayer. Let's kneel. Amen. So this morning, I'll just lift it up so you can see the board. I've just summarized what we did this morning, basically talking about the contrasting expectation of the Jews at the time of Christ and how their expectation that Christ would come as a physical earthly king and set up this kingdom on earth and overthrow their enemies, and how Ellen White parallels that to the views at the time she's writing, where she says thousands, well, she doesn't say thousands, she says a lot of people have the view that Christ is going to set up a temporal kingdom at that time, and they want to get involved in government. And we talked a bit about laws and force and how they want to institute Christianity basically in that time period. And we see that's what's happening today in our society around us. And I just summarized the differences between the two here. So we talked about a temporal kingdom, which has a king over it, basically. And this king is generally an angry, not very approachable king. The character isn't very nice. It's force and power that it uses to set up its kingdom, that they would use. That there's a lot of oppression, corruption, and intolerance. It's all about preserving the nation or the group or the organization. And I think we can have that spirit in Adventism, that we want to preserve the church at the expense of the individual, that the ship is going through the whole church. You know, that this idea of organization is more important than the individual. And preserving the nation, we see with the rhetoric that's spoken in America now, with making the nation great, and that whole idea of making you on top and everybody else underneath. And this leads to patriotism, nationalism, which we know, and they're calling themselves Christian patriots. They've got this patriotism for their country. And it's all about that the individual can be sacrificed, so others can be sacrificed, but it's all about self-preservation and power of those that are leading out. The people who are organizing this kingdom are all about preserving themselves and their own power at the expense of the individual, because the minority groups, and we would put probably here minorities, and this was the mindset of the Jews at the time of Christ. You know, if you're a publican, a sinner, a sick person, all the people that were damaged in some way in their minds, they were less than, they were poor, they had nothing. These are minority groups who were treated, well, actually there's a lot of people in that time, can be sacrificed. They're not important. Their voice doesn't count. They don't have to be treated with equality, respect, etc., because they're less than. They're seen as less than other people. And this is in complete contrast to this spiritual kingdom that Christ comes to set up, which is based on love and mercy, fatherly tenderness, freedom, that the leader of it is a father who's tender and compassionate, kind, generous, bothers about the individual. It requires a heart change with the individual. It's based on the true teaching and practice of the word of God. And it's all about saving others, and not about your preserving yourself at the expense of others. It's about saving people and self-sacrifice. And that is accomplished by people sacrificing themselves and their own needs, their own desires to help others. So with that in mind, then, when we get to the time of, so this is at the time of Christ, they've got this viewpoint. We see that Ellen White says at her day, many people have got that perspective, even though she's probably talking about other Christians. We're not applying it to Adventists when she writes that, but I think we can see that Adventists have that viewpoint too, or some Adventists do. And she counsels here, if we turn back to the document from this morning, she counsels us that we are doing the same thing as the Israelites were in sacrificing our children to Molech. So through the Old Testament, we have the story progresses from Adam to Moses. You know, Moses, he calls them out of Egypt. We've already recognized that under the Egyptians, they have an apis bull concept of God, of who God is, his characteristics that the Israelites carry with them. And then through the Old Testament, we have them fighting all the tribes, the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Moabites, and they all have their gods. And foremost amongst these gods, we have Ashtoreth, we have Molech, we have Baal, and we're probably most familiar with the terms Baal and possibly Molech. But I think Baal is probably our foremost one because we have the story of Elijah. Now, if I were to ask you, I don't know what, before we get into who Baal and Molech are, who Baal was, I don't know if people can just say who they think Baal was before we move any further. If anyone hasn't read the document, hopefully you haven't read it, so we don't know. But as an Adventist, and with the story of Elijah, I don't know if people have an understanding of who Baal was. So somebody like who's been Adventist for a long time. So Sister Daisy and Sister Sophie, if you can give your take on it. Sister Daisy, are you there?
So we were just conversing about what you meant, like characteristics of Baal, or
I guess, or what god was he? You know, they had the gods of, so we might say he was a god of war or something. So in your head, who is Baal? What is he a god of? Or is he not a god of anything specific? He's just a false god. What's your concept of Baal?
I thought Baal was, I'm probably completely wrong.
Probably completely
Baal
wrong.
was like a sun god.
Oh, it cut out. He was a what?
Yeah. I'm not too sure, but I always conceptualized him as maybe like a sun god.
Sun god. Okay. Yeah. That's what I was expect. That's what I would expect a long-term Adventist to say. I don't know if anyone else has that view, but I don't know if Debbie has that. Maybe Sophie. I'm just trying to think of the people that have been in a long-time Adventist. Because when I asked Brother Leon, I've asked him this before. He didn't have any concept of who Baal was.
Yeah.
Go on.
I've heard that, or my upbringing, that Baal was sun god as well.
Right. Okay. And I think that's a very interesting concept. So as this unfolds, we'll perhaps be confronted with a more of a deeper picture of who this was. And it isn't limited to the sun. And I think we limit him probably because of the story of Baal on Mount Carmel. And so we always, and because we make application to Mount Carmel saying it's the Sunday law crisis, we say it's over the true creator God. Are you going to worship the creator God or the God of the sun, Baal, in kind of one breath? And that's how I had conceptualized it. So when I started researching, I was a bit surprised that that's not quite true. So I think that's very interesting in the light of the fact that we're saying it's not about the Sunday law. And it buys into that, when we do parable teaching, compare and contrast, well, who was Baal then? Let's see who's the opposite of that. If he's not the sun god, then what's the true God in the opposite? It's not all about Sunday and Sabbath. So let's just keep that in the back of our heads as we look at this Molech first. And the reason I went here is because I saw that she says this in Child Guidance 181.3. It says children on, I see in the chat, Alison's there. Hi, Alison. She's asking a link for the document. Okay, Brother Curtis is going to forward it to you. Thank you. We're just working on a Molech and Baal document at the moment. I think we're on page 3. And it's the quote, Child Guidance 181.3. Children are not to be trained to be the devotees of society. They are not to be sacrificed to Molech, but they are to become members of the Lord's family. Parents are to be filled with the compassion of Christ that they may work for the salvation of the souls that are placed under their influence. Now she goes on to say what worshipping Molech looks like a bit, but I didn't want to get into that particularly because I'm thinking, let's try and just go with the sentences we have. So she says they're not to be trained to be devotees of society. I don't know how we understand that term, but I'm just going to say devotee is someone who's devoted to. So when you're devoted to someone, you're in love with it, you worship it, you admire it. So they're not to be trained to worship, love, and admire society. And I think if we substitute the word sort of the world there, the way the world does things, the way the society around them, the people around them do things, they're not to be trained to be devoted to that. And then she says they're not to be sacrificed to Molech. So is that what sacrifice to Molech looks like? I mean, we can have a discussion about that. But they are to become members of the Lord's family. So in contrast to becoming members of society, I guess, or devotees of society or the world, they need to be made members of the Lord's family. They need to be devoted to the Lord, to God and his family and God's people. So if we do two classes of society, we want them to be attracted to those that worship the true God and not those in the world who are worshiping everything else but the true God. And if we put this in the context, of the statement we read in Desire of Ages, and we see that the society back then was the Jewish society, then we could perhaps say, what does she mean when she said, what does that look like for us now? Because she goes on to talk about, I'll tell you what, she goes on to talk about parties, picnics, concerts, socializing with the world, basically. And we look at that now, and we perhaps don't see it in such a bad light as we did before as conservative Adventists. So now I'm saying, what does that actually look like? Is it wrong to go to a concert? Is it wrong to have a birthday party? You know, so some of those things that we kind of said taboo as conservatives, and the way we've read her statements, we think that's offering them to Molech in some way. Let's reassess maybe what she means by that. But she's contrasting becoming part of the Lord's family with the world, or with a false religious family, you know, not the true God, basically. And then she says, parents are to be filled with the compassion of Christ, that they may work for the salvation of the souls that are placed under their influence. So I want to pick out that part. I want to pick out the compassion. So she says we're to work with the compassion of Christ. So I would say that if you offer them to Molech, you're not doing that. You're not worshipping. I mean, you're not training them with the compassion of Christ. So in some way you're being harsh, perhaps you're having these characteristics, oppressive, forceful, angry, corrupt, intolerant, instead of having compassion on them, on the souls that are under your care. And this compassion is a sympathy, a love, a kindness, a patience, a mercy. Everything that we would define as empathy or compassion is how she's saying we should be raising our children. And the opposite of that is offering them to Molech. So I wanted to pull out that aspect of it, because I don't think that's how we read this normally. We read it like you can't do anything the world does because it's just going to kill you. And I'm thinking, well, let's go deeper into this. She's actually contrasting by saying that we should be having the compassion of Christ when we raise these children. So why does she make this analogy? Why does she say they're not to be sacrificed to Molech, especially children? Well, we've probably got some concept of this because of Apis Bull, and because of, you know, we've read the statement already by Ellen White about stuff offering the children through the fire. And this comes from pagan practices at the time. So the first reference, I think, is Leviticus 20. So if we turn to Leviticus 20, these are the laws that Moses is being given, the extra laws in addition to the 10 Commandments, all about the pagans around them at the time and what they should and shouldn't do with these pagans. Now, I've quoted verse 5 there, but it actually starts in verse 2. So verse 1, it says, the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, and then if we go 2 to 5, I'll just read that. Again, thou shalt say to the children of Israel, whosoever he be of the children of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn in Israel, that giveth any of his seed unto Molech, he shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. And I will set my face against that man, and will cut him off from among his people, because he hath given of his seed unto Molech, to defile my sanctuary and to profane my holy name. And if the people of the land do anyways hide their eyes from the man, when he giveth of his seed unto Molech, and kill him not, then I will set my face against that man and against his family, and will cut him off, and that go a whoring after him, to commit whoredom with Molech from among their people. So what does everybody think about that? What's going on here? How are we seeing this passage? So these are laws that have been given by Moses. They've come out of Egypt. They've been given the 10 Commandments, Exodus. They've got the sanctuary service. They've got all these additional laws now about what they can and cannot do when they enter Canaan. And I don't know, Sister Sophie, are you there? Can you talk or not? Oh, maybe she can't talk.
I have a question.
Yes. Hi, Alison.
Hi. Good morning. Happy Sabbath.
Mm.
You know, from my understanding in my Adventist, I guess, understanding and teaching through Molech is that the parents are sacrificing their children to Molech, or how they back in the time sacrificed their children to the fire god, right? To have them as burnt sacrifices. And as you had previously just mentioned, that you know, with partying, and in our time as conservatives, that we would sacrifice them to letting them have parties, be more socially active, and playing games they shouldn't be playing, or wearing clothes they shouldn't be wearing, and so forth like that. But now we're having a little bit more of a liberal freedom or idea, but not false. I don't want to confuse the two. You're asking, what does that mean, right?
Kind of. I wasn't really trying to make application today. I was asking in the context of Leviticus how we see that passage now. What's God saying to them in the context of the passage of Leviticus? Or are you wanting to talk about application to today?
No, I don't want to talk about applications. I was just, well, first of all, what Bible verse? Because I missed, you went so fast. I missed
Leviticus
it.
20. Sorry, it's in the document, but it's actually only quoting Leviticus 20 verse 5 in the document, and I just read 2 to 5 because that's the
Okay.
context of it. And the reason it's important, I think, is the whole way. How are they told here to deal with people that worship Molech and give their children to Molech?
Yeah.
So
That's what I was wondering. Yeah.
you've got two things going on. You've got one thing is this is a serious crime because it's going to be punished by stoning. And this crime of offering their children, we know we've touched on this before already, that they offered earlier today. We didn't read it today. We read it another day, but we've started reading it today. This quote about Ellen White, where she says that they passed the children through fire, and so this is what they did with Molech. Molech was this god who had a burning flame, burning fire, fiery furnace, and they had to pass the child through the fire. And if the child survived unscathed, it was treated as a god. If it was burnt, then it was killed, because it was, it had to be offered as a sacrifice to the gods. So this is a pagan religious service. So he's hitting at two things. It's wrong to do this because they're sacrificing their children. And the second thing is because it's a religious ceremony to this god, this false god, Molech. Molech doesn't exist. It's not a real god. It's not a breathing, living god like the God of Israel is. And he's attacking their false system of worship, their false understanding of how to worship God. So it's connected to the rituals of worship. And they're told they can't do this. They're not allowed to worship to the god of Molech. They're not allowed to follow the ways of the heathen. Now, the way Ellen White's taken that, well, let's go to Ellen White in a minute, but in this passage, God is warning them that they cannot go commit whoredom with the Molech, because they're committing spiritual adultery by worshipping this false god. They're giving the heathen around them a wrong impression. They're sacrificing their child, killing them, which is wrong. It's murder. And he says anyone who does this, who profanes his holy name, is going to be stoned with stones. And what picture does that conjure up in your head?
Sister Emma.
Yes.
Sorry, it's not exactly to answer your question.
Go on.
I wanted to make the point before before answering the question.
Yeah.
It's interesting that it seems quite like severe, like, oh, who would pass a child in fire? But when we read earlier about Caiaphas and how he picked up things from the
Heathen. Oh, you're cutting out, I think. Carry on. Can you?
long prophecy of a child being sacrificed, in terms of from the Garden of Eden, your seed, the seed of the woman will kind of be sacrificed. And even see with Abraham, maybe they look back in Abraham and think, oh, Abraham was about to kill his child and that was okay. And maybe they've seen things like, in Egypt where the firstborn was killed by when Moses was young. And then again, when they're leaving Egypt, God kills all the firstborns, all the firstborn sons. And so it's kind of like, I can kind of start to see where they brought, not say I agree, but I can kind of start to sympathize as they would bring in this worship, because in that time, maybe they've mingled it so much with the heathen. So they have an idea of there's going to come a child who's going to sacrifice for everybody, but they've mingled that with the heathen child kind of sacrifice, that child worship, if that child sacrifice and worship of Molech. So I can kind of understand, like, it's almost like, I think the point I'm making is they have a bit of understanding of prophecy, but they've kind of mixed it with they've imbibed what's going on with the heathen around, to counter that wrong understanding. And when we look at it, it looks like really horrific, but at the time of Caiaphas, when he was doing something similar, but it's just with Christ.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it looks horrific because for us, it's just totally alien to anyone to kill their child. Now it's illegal. It's immoral. It's just sickening to think that you would put your child through fire potentially to kill them, or to offer them to the gods in a sacrifice in that way, thinking that God will be pleased with that kind of sacrifice, that it will pay the debt in some way. It's a works-based religion, which all false religions are, but it's feeling that in some way you have to appease God to please him. He's actually pleased with the smell of sacrifice. And but this is some of the imagery we get from the practices of the Israelites, that he's pleased with the sacrifices of animals when they're done properly. I mean, obviously he says elsewhere that he's not, because they keep on sacrificing the animal without understanding why. But that essentially is the system he set up, that you should bring an animal. It's a good thing to confess your sins over this animal, to pay the penalty for sin. The blood has to be shed. So let's kill this animal. And it just spilled over into killing a human, because that would be a better sacrifice, wouldn't it, than an animal? It's more costly, it costs you more, you're sacrificing more to give up a child, and it pays the penalty to shed some blood. So they've got that concept that to appease the gods, to please God, we have to sacrifice something. It's what he needs to send us the rain, the sun, to keep going. We have to give something back. And all that concept is involved with Christianity, is involved with Judaism, with the Jewish system. But they don't realize that it's not about what they can give, because they can't give anything. They're sinners, they're lost and undone. So God says, look, because you're not good enough to pay that price, I'm going to die for you. And that's what it was supposed to teach them, that he himself would become the sacrifice. And they have missed that totally. So they're doing the right thing in a sense. They're sacrificing something even more valuable than an animal, shedding some blood, but it's not pleasing God. They think it's pleasing God. This is why they're doing it. But he himself says he'll pay that penalty. So they've missed the whole way that God loves them, that he says, I'll offer me myself because I love you so much. It's not that I'm angry and you have to pay the penalty. So they've got his character twisted. And so they have that, like Curtis says here, they have the form and not the spirit. Exactly. So they haven't got a full understanding of why they're doing what they're doing, which leads them to go to an extreme. So just like the heathens, let's offer the children instead of the animals, because surely the God would be more pleased with that, because this is paying him back in some way. I'm doing something to please him. It's all about what I can do. And Christ saying, you can't do anything, and because you can't, I'm going to do it for you. I'm going to pay that price of that blood for you on your behalf. That's how much I love you. I'm going to substitute myself. And they've missed that. So they missed the love of God and the depth of the love of God in the sacrifice. But the system is still quite shocking, that you have to bring an animal and shed its blood, and shed even more, that you have to shed a human. But it's just one step on from shedding an animal blood to pay this price in some way of the cost of this sin. So now he comes in and says, no, I don't want you to do that. I especially don't want you to sacrifice to Molech, because it's all about false worship and it's not about who I am. You're not getting it. And if you do that, I'm going to stone you. And to me, that's like, whoa, isn't that like the whole thing about stoning? It's almost like force. Punishment is coming on you. I'm not going to tolerate this practice. I'm going to stone you, because that's how bad it is. But he's dealing with the mindset of the Israelites, which is, a punishment relationship, because they're children. And I think that's what we've got to see, that moving on from that. We've got to understand how God's dealing with his people in this history, that they've just come out of slavery. They don't know the right hand from the left. They're seeing God in this picture anyway. And he's almost buying into that picture by saying, I'm going to stone you if you don't stop this practice. That's how bad it is. And so out of fear now, or out of compulsion or force, they're going to say, okay, let's not do that anymore. Now that might deal with the form of it, mightn't it? But is it going to deal with the heart level? It's like children. Force is never going to work with them long term. You can say, I'm going to punish you for doing that, and they're going to say, okay, I'm not doing it anymore, but their heart is not changed. And this is the problem he's got with the Israelites. What does he do now with this whole thing? And stoning is going to come up later, and that's why I think it's important to see its connection here with false worship and stoning, and how justifiable it is to stone someone when they don't worship God in the right way, because people even today have that mindset. So we need to see, how can we shift from that to this? Because you get to the time of Christ and you see he's not going to stone anyone in here, but it's okay back here to stone. So I wanted to pick out that point, as well as to see about Molech and who Molech is. So Molech is a false god in some way that they're offering their children to, and this is profanation and whoredom in God's eyes. And then we'll move to 1 Kings 11:7. And 1 Kings 11:7 is just pulling out the point that Solomon is doing this. So now you get Solomon, and it's almost like the slavery argument that we use. Solomon has slaves. We see this progression through scripture, but we get to the time of Solomon and we recognize that this is the wisest king that's ever lived. He got wisdom from God. He was specially blessed by God, and he goes into this gross darkness by marrying all these heathen wives. And because of that, he wants to please his wives. He gets drawn over into this idolatry. So he mixes idolatry with the true worship of God. He's attributed for building the temple for God. So he builds Solomon's temple, but it should have been God's temple, but he builds this temple for God. And we all know him for that. So that this is the height of worship in Israel, where God should have been honored the most. And at the same time, he's offering sacrifices to these false gods. So 1 Kings 11:7, and the lead up to 7 is if we start in 5 even. It says, for Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. And Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord. So he's got several false gods going on here. And went not fully after the Lord, as did David his father. Then did Solomon build an high place for Shemosh, the abomination of Moab, in the hill that is before Jerusalem, and for Molek, the abomination of the children of Ammon. So here we see that the different tribes have different names for the gods, but I want us to see that there's a commonality with these gods, that it has a similar root to it once we start looking at who Molech is. So it says Ashtoreth is the goddess to the Zidonians. We have Chemosh is for the Moabites. So each heathen tribe has their version of Apis Baal, basically, of a false god. And here we see that Molech is the one for the children of Ammon. And we know that Moab and Ammon are the children of Lot. So this is a perversion. This has come out of Israel. So we can see how the heathens, it's just a circle where the heathens are looking at what God's doing and they're just copying it and they're just twisting it. And they've actually come from the true line. Moab and Ammon have come from Lot. And so this is sickening that they built high places, and this is all led out by Solomon. One of the wisest men ever lives. He builds a high place to Molech in Jeremiah 32:35. So unless anyone's got any thoughts on that one, I'm just going to go to Jeremiah. So we've got Jeremiah 32:35 as well. And there's more reference to this, but I just picked out a few pertinent ones for Molech because I didn't want to spend too much time looking at all the references, but that's something you could do to get more insight on it. But Jeremiah 32:35. I'm in 25, so I'm in the wrong place. 32:35. And they built the high places of Baal, which are in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to cause their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire unto Molech, which I commanded them not, neither came it into my mind that they should do this abomination to cause Judah to sin. So now they're in the time of Jeremiah, and he's saying they're building high places to Baal. At the same time, they're causing their sons and daughters to pass through the fire unto Molech. So they're doing both, and it seems that they're very closely aligned, and they're both seen in this verse. So let's have a look more closely about the history of this and how did they get to be doing this. So there's I'm just going to read from the document now. It says, a medieval French rabbi, Shlomo Yitzchaki, otherwise known as Rashi, wrote an extensive commentary on the Talmud in the 12th century. His analysis of the book of Jeremiah, chapter 7, painted a vivid picture of the sacraments of Molech's worship as related in the Hebrew text. So this is basically a rabbi from the 12th century, and he's commenting on the Israelites and this practice of worshipping Molech. It says Topheth is Molech. So Topheth is mentioned in Jeremiah 7, I think, and he's saying it's the same god as Molech. Basically, it's just a different name for Molech. Which was made of brass, and they heated him from his lower parts, and his hands being stretched out and made hot, they put the child between his hands, and it was burnt, when it vehemently cried out. But the priest beat a drum that the father might not hear the voice of his son, and his heart might not be moved. And I thought that was very interesting. So this is, the word Molech is from Melech, which is MLK in the Hebrew, and it's the Hebrew for king. So, and this was traditionally a man with a bull's head. So it's an Apis bull, basically. It has a bull's head, and you've probably seen pictures of this. So it's basically a cow with horns. And I'm not very good at drawing a cow here, but this is a...
Emma, we can't see that because you're too high up.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's down. Move the screen. I'm not on the right. Okay, probably don't need to see my drawing anyway. But there's this cow figure here, and he sits on some kind of... he's got a man's body, and he sits on a throne. He's got his hands outstretched like this. And this throne that he's sitting on is basically a fiery furnace. And it's often open at the front here. So you've got this fire here, and these are burning hot. So they would sometimes put that, I don't know if they'd put the baby in there, but the picture I've seen, they place the baby on here. And of course it gets burnt because this is roasting hot. This is all ivory, but brass, sorry. So it's metal, it's hot metal, and it's firing out these things. I mean, and even this kind of conjures up images on the plain of Jura with the fiery furnace, you know, this whole thing about offering through fire, and it's connected to the Hebrews. Obviously, they burnt sacrifices on the altar. And so, but what the interesting thing about it to me is that this is a cow. So this is a bull's head, and Molech is a bull god. It's a half bull, half man god. So it's a mixture of beast and man. And the thing is, as they did this, as they put the child between his hands, it was burnt. And when it vehemently cried out, when it screamed out, the priest would beat a drum. So they played this music so that the father wouldn't hear his child crying out, because what father would not hear a child crying out and not want to take it out of the fire and might not be moved? So what's another way we could say this? What are they doing? That the way I'm interpreting that is that they are actually crushing out compassion. So they're stamping out compassion from the heart of the father here, so there can be no compassion. They don't want this father to hear their child crying out. And this is what they're seeking to avoid, because they know it's not going to happen if the father hears his child screaming, he's just going to rescue the child. So this is a way of crushing out sympathy and compassion. And the fact that it's linked to an Apis bull, because this is a bull god, so that it's a very similar to the Apis bull concept, that this is a powerful figure with a bull involved. And it's we go on to ask, who is Baal then? So other scholars have claimed that Molech is merely another name for Baal, the sacred bull who was widely worshipped in the ancient Near East. Baal is also frequently mentioned in the Old Testament, sometimes even in proximity to Molech. Jeremiah 32:35, for instance, which we just read, refers to rituals dedicated to Baal in the Hinnom Valley with the offering of child sacrifices to Molech. Allusions made to Molech in the context of the Canaanite fertility cult, which was headed by Baal, also suggest a close relationship between the two figures. Baal, or Lord, if you look at Strong's and Brown Driver Briggs, it says that Baal means master, husband, lord, owner, ruler, to be master, to marry or rule over or possess. So Baal, so we have Molech, who is half bull and half man, and he's a king, because Molech means king. So this is an Apis bull figure, because we saw that the bull was on a level with Pharaoh in Egypt. And so you've got this half bull, half man imagery that leads out in Egypt as an Apis bull. So this is the same as Molech. He's half bull, he's half man. And now you get to Baal. And Baal means ruler or husband or lord or owner. Lord, master, husband. And I think this buys into the headship concept as well, because he's a husband. But it actually means Lord at its root. And that's why we've got Lord there first. So Lord is what you'd look up if you see Baal in, because it's Baal, which means Lord. So while many Baals were worshipped in the ancient Middle East, most readers are particularly interested in Baal as the enemy of the God of the Israelites. This section will look at the Canaanite sources regarding this Baal. The biblical treatment of Baal will be dealt with below. So among Baal's titles was Rider of the Clouds, Almighty, or Lord of the Earth. So Baal was Rider of the Clouds, Almighty, so he's all powerful, Almighty, and what else? Lord of the Earth, Lord of the Earth. And when we look at that, we can see a lot of the Old Testament imagery for the God of heaven, for the Creator God. He rides the clouds, he's above the clouds, he's almighty, he's Lord of the earth, he has dominion, he has power. He was the God of both fertility and the thunderstorm, as well as a mighty warrior. So right back there now, we're seeing that he is Apis bull. He's a warrior, just like Apis bull. He is a god of fertility, which is Apis bull. Thunderstorm, he has power over the weather, sometimes a sun god and the protector of crops and livestock. So he would be prayed to for the rain as well as the sun, and the protector of the livestock and crops. So again, He's more than just a sun god. And the sun god obviously is what we have boxed him into with an Adventist theology, but he is Apis bull, basically. He's a god of everything, fertility, thunderstorm, everything. And it's been suggested by modern scholars that the Lord of the Hebrews and the Baal of the Canaanites may not always have been so distinct. Now, this is interesting. I don't know how, obviously this is one take on it. So, and I've got this from Wikipedia. So how, but it makes sense to me and how accurate it is. We don't know historically what they went through, but they're quoting scripture to prove this point. So just bear with this thought and see what you think. So Psalm 82:1 states that God presides in the great assembly. He gives judgment among the gods. Many commentators believe this verse harkens back to a time when the Hebrew religion was not yet monotheistic. Some suggest that Yahweh and Baal were originally both thought of as sons of El, while others claim that the worship of Yahweh and Baal may once have been nearly indistinguishable. So different people are commenting on this and saying that he was the God among gods. There were many gods out there, and that he was the top god, which is how the Egyptians kind of personified Apis bull, that he was the top god amongst many gods. And this is how the Hebrew mindset was approaching this problem, that yes, there's a creator God, but he's one God amongst many gods. So they still embraced all these as well, thinking that, okay, he's the God of gods, he's the top God, but there's many other gods as well. And this was the mindset of the heathen. So, and people here are speculating that maybe the Hebrew religion originally was not yet monotheistic, meaning it didn't have just one God, it had many gods. Now, I think that's taking it too far, but this is what commentators are speculating, that it grew in this environment of some suggesting that Yahweh and Baal were originally thought of as sons of El. And when you think about the great controversy and Lucifer and Christ and their proximity, there's some truth even in that, you know, that the good and evil comes out of the same place. It comes out of heaven, this warfare in heaven between these two antagonistic forces. So the heathen have got this picture and twisted it, that there are many gods. And even commentators are saying, you know, that maybe the Hebrews had many gods actually, but that their one God was the true God, was the highest God. And that they're both El, while others claim that the worship of Yahweh and Baal were once not so indistinguishable, so they were actually very close to each other. The later prophets and temple priests condemn worshipping Yahweh in the high places, declaring that Jerusalem's altar only was authorized. Yet earlier prophets and even Elijah himself offered sacrifices at these very high places, like he did on Mount Carmel. Similarly, the establishment of sacred pillars was condemned as related to the worship of Baal and Ashtaroth. Yet the patriarch Jacob erected a stone pillar in honor of El at Bethel. Moses set up 12 pillars at which sacrifices were offered at Mount Sinai, and Joshua established a sacred pillar at Shechem. Clearly then, the worship of Baal and Yahweh resembled each other more closely in the early days of Israel's history, but came to be more distinct through later prophetic teaching and priestly legislation. So they're showing there's this progression through scripture of how certain things were accepted and were used by God to worship, but they were also used by the heathen. And we know that the track of error lies close to the track of truth. So I'm not saying by this that, you know, they started out as heathens in some way, accepting many gods, and somehow God, you know, we know that Adam and Eve in the beginning knew that there was only one God. But because of the corruption of the Israelites in Egypt, and then the coming out through those tribes in the Canaan, it's got so close together that God has to now untangle the mess. So we see him actually instructing them to set up pillars as memorials to him, which is close to what they do to Asherah. So the words used for pole or pillar is grove. And you know the Asherah groves where they worship the false gods. Asherah is a sacred tree or pole set up near an altar. So we see in Judges chapter 5, 25 and 26, Gideon is told to cut down the grove and burn the wood, suggesting that this pole is made from wood. So they had set up like a tree trunk, a pole to Asherah, to a false god, and Gideon's instructed to cut this down now. But we can see how close that is to the Israelite worship when, you know, Moses and Jacob are told to set up pillars as memorials. So it's not so distinct as we would like to think, perhaps, the heathen practices from God's practices. It's so close to that, to the truth, that because we look at it and think, how could they possibly set up a tree and worship it, or set up a pole in the middle of a high mountain and worship it, and set up an altar to a false god, make an altar with a fire, which is exactly what Abraham's told to do. Everywhere he goes, he's told to set up an altar and sacrifice a lamb. And now they're told to set up pillars as memorials. and worship there at the pillar. So it's very close to worshipping the pillar. Obviously, they're not told to worship the pillar, but the practices are the same. So I just want us to see how close the practices are, how close the form is to what Israel's doing, but the motive is different. And I think that's really crucial to see, because all the way along, down through history, Christ is trying to educate his people to see, to change the heart, to change the spirit, and to do the form, but in the right spirit. So why are you doing this form, and what are you doing it for? So now he gets to Gideon, and he's told to cut down these poles. And then we get to Deuteronomy 12. Not we get to it. Deuteronomy 12 is before Gideon. But it says in Deuteronomy 12, 1-4, these are the statutes and judgments which you shall observe to do in the land which the Lord God of the fathers giveth thee to possess it, all the days that ye live upon the earth. Ye shall utterly destroy all the places wherein the nations which ye shall possess serve their gods, upon the high mountains and upon the hills, and under every green tree. And you shall overthrow their altars, and break their pillars, and burn their groves with fire. And you shall hew down the graven images of their gods, and destroy the names of them out of that place. Ye shall not do so unto the Lord your God. So they're not allowed to use the places where the heathen has done this for their worship. They're to cut it down, burn it with fire, destroy these gods, understandably. And this is what they're told in Deuteronomy when they go into the land. That's what they've got to do. So going back to Baal, if anyone's got any questions or comments, please interrupt.
Not so much a question, just a time check. We've got
Okay.
about 20 minutes, Emma.
20 minutes. Okay, fine. So since Baal simply means Lord, there is no obvious reason why at one time it could not be applied to Yahweh as well as other gods, because Baal just meant Lord. Indeed, it is clearly the case that the Israelites did not always consider Baal and Yahweh worship incompatible. Several prominent Israelites bore Baal names. The judge Gideon was also called Jerubbaal, a name that seems to mean Baal strives. A descendant of Jacob's firstborn son was named Baal. An uncle of King Saul, that is brother of Saul's father, Kish, was also named Baal. And then we have Eshbaal, son of Saul. We have Meribbaal, Saul's grandson. Baalidia, son of David. And First Chronicles mentions the name Baaliah, meaning either Baal Yahweh or Yahweh is Baal. And what do you do with that? It's like, we know names are significant in scripture, but it seems like they had heathen names back then, that there was a mixture of what we would say probably heathen names. But back then, if it just meant Lord, they may have had a different understanding of, they were trying to symbolize that these people were worshippers of the true God, because it meant Lord, and their God was the Lord of the earth. And that they were trying to make the creator God the Lord of the earth. So using heathen terms for something that they understand to be the worship of the true God. So in summary, then, I'm going to try to summarize what we're saying here is we can see that in outward form, the Israelites looked like the pagans in many ways. They had altars, pillars, etc., where they offered sacrifices, but the heathen offered people and the Israelites animals. They used the same names. They were a reflection of the culture around them. But as time passed, God has to make a clear distinction between them. In every history, God is trying to separate them from their wrong concepts about God that they have imbibed from the religions around them. He seeks to change the form and the spirit. And their concepts of God are a supreme warrior king, male-dominated headship, aggressive and cruel. And this is this imagery of Baal being the Lord, the master, and the husband, that they would be slaves to this kind of God. So we question the portrayal of God when they come out of Egypt, a mighty pillar of fire and cloud. Mount Sinai is on fire, shaking, loud noise, dramatic power. And this buys into their expectation. But when you understand where they're coming from, God has to reach them where they are and bring them into relationship with him. So he's dealing with people whose concept of God is this heathen, fire-breathing, fire-making, one who rules the thunder and the clouds, one who makes a big noise, who's powerful, who they want to see making powerful demonstrations. So he has to almost conform to that image on Mount Sinai when he does all the smoke and the billows and the fire. And I think if we understand where they're coming from, we understand how he's working with them. And he works in the constraints of the time period he's in, with the worship of the time he's in. So he says, these are the issues, and these are how we're going to separate these issues out now. But he starts with where they're at. So in Old Testament, we can see fire coming down and burning up enemies like Elijah and the 50 men. Or the ground opens up and swallows people like Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Or people are stoned and burnt with fire like Achan in Joshua 7:35. And all these practices seem totally alien to our concept of Jesus and a modern day Christianity. But when we see it in the context of the times they're living in, it's not so alien, it's not so far off, and he's just working with them in the time they're in. We know that the heathen religions burnt people by fire. Did they stone? So this is another interesting question. The history of stoning is quite hard to find out, but in the Bible, it seems to be the foremost form of state punishment and acceptable in ancient times. But the time you get to Christ's time and beyond, it's being phased out even among the Jewish community. And this is a different picture to Christ in the New Testament. He rebukes the disciples for wanting to call fire down on people. He rebukes the people bringing the woman caught in adultery. As an aside, stoning does not seem to be in the Quran, and it was not a form of punishment used at first. But over time, some Islamic nations have adopted the practice, and in many parts of the world, it is being noted that it's mostly against women, LGBTQ people, and this is interesting. So just before we make that point, so we see here then that stoning was used in ancient times as a form of punishment on a state level. And so Christ or the Jews were only buying into what was acceptable method of corporal punishment at that time. So it would be a bit like God saying, now you'll go to prison if you do that, because the state at that time, that was their method of punishment. So we don't know exactly the history of stoning, but we do know it dates back quite a long way, and that it was used in society as a form of punishment in some cultures. And so if we accept that model, then we can see that this stoning isn't so abhorrent as it would have been back then. It wasn't as abhorrent back then as it is to us now, sorry. So for us, it would be, okay, at the worst, you'll get the electric chair, because that's what society does to someone who's going to be killed off. But even, I guess that's more similar to that than saying go to prison, but it was a corporal punishment at the time. So it's not so extreme. And one of the reasons, well, we'll go into that in a minute, how it's not actually that as bad as we might think. But if we can see it in that context, then we can see it's not so abhorrent perhaps as God just coming arbitrarily along and saying you're going to stone people now if they do something wrong. So he's working with the society in which he's in to bring his people further along a line. So by the time we get to New Testament, we can clearly show that stoning isn't the way to go, or at least Christ doesn't condone stoning this woman caught in adultery. And when you get to, this is very interesting. I don't know if people, has everybody heard of Rushduni? I don't know if everyone has heard of Rushduni, but
Never heard of him.
You've never heard of him. Okay, so Elder Tabo did a series in France, I think not last year, the year before, but when I was there, so I heard some of it, about dominion theology. And Elder Tess has touched on it with the seven mountain theology of the evangelical right wing. And it comes out of dominion teaching in the 1960s. And Rushduni is behind dominion, the teaching of evangelical Christians in America today. And he died in 2001, which may be significant because it's a significant prophetic year for us. But he has his basically school of thinking. He was very big on homeschooling as well, which puts me off. But anyway, but he was an evangelical right-wing Christian who had some extreme views. His followers and critics have argued that his thought exerts considerable influence on the evangelical Christian right today. The late American Calvinist and Christian Reconstructionist cleric Ruza John Rushduni, his son Mark and his son-in-law Gary North supported the reinstatement of the Mosaic Law's penal sanctions. Under such a system, the list of civil crimes which carried a death sentence by stoning would include homosexuality, adultery, incest, lying about one's virginity, bestiality, witchcraft, idolatry or apostasy, public blasphemy, false prophesying, kidnapping, rape, and bearing false witness in a capital case. So Rushduni starts a group of Christians in the 1960s, and it's more or less a cult kind of following, where he has a group that worship in a certain way, and he is pushing, and he's written books, Reconstructionist books, about how Christians should get involved in politics. And this is one of the influences on the right-wing Christians today that has driven them down this route of seeking political influence. So he's quite a significant figure. If you look him up, you'll find out more about his teachings, but a lot of his teachings are what white right-wing Americans today would agree with. And so he is now here pushing that we bring back in the punishment of stoning from Moses' time. And when we understand the concept of dispensationalism, this is abhorrent to us, that he would think about bringing back stoning. And when I made reference earlier to Islamic cultures, it's interesting that today, some Islamic cultures, it's actually legal. It is legal to stone still. But what they found is, it's been noted that most of the people that get stoned in these countries are women, or LGBTQ, or the ethnic minorities, for doing things like adultery, or not even adultery, for doing minor offences. So we can see how this punishment is being used now in a model of inequality. So it's sexist, it's racist, it's white supremacy, it's nationalistic. So the root of it is wrong anyway, the whole methodology of using it. And you can see in many of these crimes, he's highlighted homosexuality, adultery, incest, lying about one's virginity. I'm sure that's not going to be about the man's virginity. I'm sure that's going to be about the woman's virginity, and the woman committing adultery, and the woman being into witchcraft. I'm sure this will be a very sexist, slant on it. So it's just interesting to me that someone in the 21st century is seeking to bring back, or 20th century, because he's before 2000, to bring back stoning. When we're seeing this now, we should see this progression through scripture of how God wants us to bring us out of those practices and into, true Christianity. So God shows them in the plagues in Egypt that he's more powerful than any of the gods of Egypt, because they're relying on visible manifestations. And because of that, he has to have a visible leader. He has to give them Moses so that when they leave, they can follow someone. And he gives them the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire to show them visible representations of him in nature, to buy into this concept that he is the creator of the heaven and earth. He has the most power, because they need all this visible symbolism and Mount Sinai on a smoke, etc., because they can't relate to just a man, for instance, just to Moses. It's not enough. So he does all that because of the Israelite mindset at the time. And that's why we don't see fire and smoke and mountains and, on fire and pillars of cloud, etc., because we're not that same mindset. So they have this visible leader, Moses, and you can see that when Moses leaves, because they do need a visible leader as well, they need a man as leading them. But when he goes up into the mount with God, it's like God's left as well. And so now they need to make a golden calf because they need a visible leader. So we can perhaps have more sympathy in the minds of the Israelites that we need to make this golden calf. We need something we can see to worship now. So does anyone have any questions or comments on that? I want to make any observations. Oh, everyone's gone quiet. So in that context, I don't know if that helps us understanding why Ellen White says we shouldn't be offering our children to Molech, but
I'm just wondering how, as Adventists, we jump from that to don't go to school.
Absolutely. And you know why? Let's go back to that Ellen White quote. Actually, this is why I think we get to that position. Well, one reason why we might get to this position. So the quote, I purposely only quoted part of the quote from Child Guidance. If you turn to Child Guidance 181.3, I'm just going to go there. I've not got it open. 181. It's very interesting, this passage. So she's obviously saying that she's making application here, because first of all, this is not about religious worship when she applies it, whereas at the Israelite time period, they're talking about sacrificing the children to Molech. It's a pagan practice of worship to a false god, and he's saying you can't do this. So we could primarily make it a spiritual problem, and this is not about anything to do with mixing with people in the world. It's about false religion and false worship. And if you look at this, but see what she says about it. She says children are not to be trained to be devotees of society. They're not to be sacrificed to Molech, etc. Parents are to be filled with the compassion of Christ, that they may work for the salvation of the souls that are placed under their influence. They're not to have their minds all engrossed in the fashions and practices of the world. They are to educate their children to attend, they are not to educate their children to attend parties and concerts and dances, to have and attend feasts, because after this manner the Gentiles walk. So in this passage, she's making application that if you sacrifice your children to Molech, it's the same. You're doing that when you send them out to be engrossed in the fashions and practices of the world, when you send them out into the world, basically, when you let them mingle with the world, when you let them attend parties and concerts and dances, when you let them have and attend feasts, and when you let them walk after the manner of the Gentiles. So she's making an application with that verse and saying it's equivalent to us now mixing with the world. And when you look at that, it's similar because they're mixing with the world, the Israelites, when they do that, but it's all about pagan worship. It's all about false gods. It's all about worshiping those things. Now we come now into our time period, and what are we saying? Do we agree with this passage? Because
on the surface, no. But I think there's a different principle that's being addressed by Ellen White. Because at face value, we'd read, don't associate with the world, keep yourselves to yourselves, which you very much can do if you just read the words without understanding the principle that Ellen White is addressing.
So what do you see the principle as, Brother Curtis? What do you see she's doing here?
I think what you started off with was really interesting with the compassion of Christ thing, and it's that the world can really beat out empathy from you, as in false systems of education, not like university or whatever, but for example, the competitiveness that you can find in society, etc., etc. The things that do beat out compassion from you, that would be you are sacrificing your child to that idol per se, of not being empathetic towards someone else. So it seems like it's really fitting for today when you apply it to today, and how we should be empathetic, to other different races, different nationalities that go through different struggles, and whatnot. So if we apply that today, it would be sacrificing your child to that socially conservative mindset.
Yes, you're going to make it say the opposite of what it's saying when you do that, really, because you're going to say, we're going to do the opposite now. We're going to let them attend parties. What's wrong with a birthday party? What's wrong with going to a concert when it's classical music with a heathen friend? You want to win the friend, let's go to the concert. Dancing, we might just draw the line, but have an attend feast. We have potluck every week at church. Is that a feast? What's a feast?
So what feast was she talking about? What parties was she talking about? What concerts was she talking about?
Yeah, is she just talking about society in general, when the upper classes, when they come together and have a ball in the 1800s, and there's lots of money spent, and it's all about flirtation and giddiness and waltzes and worldly music, and she's talking about all that? Or is she, and is she attacking that because, like you say, she's saying that their mind shouldn't be engrossed with these things? We should teach them different principles. What's the principle she's getting at? So if we say the principle is they need to be filled with the compassion of Christ when we deal with our children, we shouldn't just palm them off on other people to educate them. It says they are not to educate their children. So you're not to instruct your children how to function in society at that level and think that that's all important. I think because everybody elevated, you've got to be a person of influence. You've got to mix with rich people and get in there and try and get invited to these balls so you get the good jobs or whatever it is. You work on the world's principles to get somewhere because that's important, instead of giving them the spiritual principles of love, compassion, service to others. It's not about you promoting yourself. That's the root of that. Don't train them up to fit in society in the way society says you have to do it. You have to operate this way, but you have to operate in a different way as a Christian. And that's what we should be educating them into. Don't think that just sending them out there in the world, they'll be okay, they'll survive it, if you don't teach them properly the principles. So I think if we could put that angle on it, then it's not about attending those things per se in themselves. It's the fact that you're letting all that shape the child's view of the world and what comes with it, which says those things are important. To have achieved anything, you have to have lots of money and have a ball every week to be successful. What defines success and achievement in your society of your time, and redefine it as a Christian now. What is success? What is making a difference? It's standing up like Ruth Bader Ginsburg for the minorities and caring about people and having compassion and equality and all those things. But I think we've misread this, and we've said, and bearing in mind, she's writing the 18th century, which is 19th century, which is very, we know, Victorian England time period where, you shouldn't really be having too much fun. I think that's the mindset of people back then. You can't have fun. Children should be seen and not heard. That whole attitude towards, I'm sure, shapes the way she writes sometimes. So we look at that and we say, okay, so they can't mix with any Gentiles. They can't go into the world. They've got to be homeschooled. Let's protect them from all this rubbish. And I think we could use this quote to defend homeschooling. They can't attend feasts, they can't go to birthdays, they don't want to hear about those things from other children. It's going to be damaging because that's how the Gentiles work, that's how the worldlings work. So they can't have anything to do with it. They can't dress in a fashionable way in any way, shape or form, you know, because if they do, their minds will be engrossed with it. And the very things we're trying to protect them from have actually pushed them into doing that. And that's what I see with our Sabbath keeping, with our conservative values, with the whole way we approach this question, drives children to actually want to go after the world instead of the opposite. And that's what I'm wrestling with as a parent. And that's another story. But the principles behind how we read this, I think, is important to how we understand what she means when she says sacrifice to Molech and how she's applied that. And it's slightly different from how it was used originally, that it was all about worship and God and who he is. And if we read that in this context, then it's not about not doing those things per se, but that's how we read it. We've got to go beyond the words and say, like you say, what's the principle? It's about having compassion of Christ. It's about having the right principles to navigate this world, to drive us, as opposed to keeping up with the Joneses or having lots of money or having lots of power and position, which you have to have all these things really, to concerts and dances. And it's about having an attitude of service, but how you train your children today to do that is another question. But
I was just reading the in Review and Herald, like where that extract is taken from, the original document.
Yes.
It's really interesting reading along, like following on from that. And then there's a quote that we were discussing that you started this on from education, where Sister White basically prohibits, if you want to call it that, or gives the counsel against sending your children to school and why that is the case. And she is basically showing that the aim of education is for that empathy and to be able to discern right from wrong, to be obedient and etc. And when you drum that out of your child, that's what essentially is sacrificing your child to Molech, because
we can't hear you. I think we lost you there.
5 minutes, Emma.
Okay. Curtis, did you go? Did his connection? I think you cut out mid-sentence. I think we lost him completely.
Yeah, he just said his iPad died.
Oh, okay. Okay. So this is an important concept, how we've read it and how we've applied it, and how we've missed the fact that it's not about the physical form of it, you know, not going to school or going to school perhaps, or not doing the outward things. It's the motive of the heart, what you're trying to teach the child and how to teach the child that in the best way now. So we saw, I think when Elder Paminda presented about schooling, that they had mistaken those verses where she says that the child shouldn't go to school till they're 10, and then the children were running unruly and when she said that, there weren't the schools available, there weren't the system that they had set up, the kindergarten schools and everything, that it wasn't necessarily just Adventist schools, it was non-Adventist schools where they could be sent. But yeah, we should have gone to the original context of that Molech one as well. And I think it'd be worthwhile reading that article from Review and Herald to get that context, to see if we can read it in a different way, that we're reading it about the principle of compassion and empathy that we should be inculcating in our children. And this is one of the reasons why we're now moving away from the homeschooling model, because we see that it's actually isolating them to not have compassion and empathy. So yeah, but I just think it's fascinating to know more about the history of Baal in summary, primarily, and Molech, but just to see how these false gods came about and what they symbolized, that we've made Baal, I think, as we said at the beginning, a sun god, when he isn't. He's actually Apis bull. He's actually everything. He's actually just very, very close to the track of truth about who God is, just like Apis bull is. And so it's more than just being the sun god. So when we see the controversy on Mount Carmel, it's about the type of God you worship. It's not just about Sabbath Sunday question, which is what we've limited it to as Adventists. So we can see that this controversy at the end of the world, it makes sense that it's about the character of God and the restoration of that character through scripture. And that's what we need to see. We need to see how he's restoring who he is to us in the context of the culture we're in. And he works dispensationally in that manner. And I think that's important to see. So that's why we've gone here. And we haven't got to, that's the end of that section of the document. But the next part was to have a look at the Bible characters and to see how he trained those Bible characters to get out of that apis bull mindset and into who behaving as God behaves in this compassionate, sympathetic, loving manner, which we see Christ doing when he comes. So unless anyone's got any further questions or thoughts, we'll close it there. I don't know if Curtis is plugged back in and if he finished his point. Are you able to talk, Curtis? No?
Yeah, you basically summed it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, are you sure?
Yeah, no, it's okay. Can carry on.
So in summary then, it's really important to see, I think, two things: the character of God, who he is and how he operates and why he does what he does. And the second thing is that progression through scripture. That's what we're learning on our repeat and enlarge, compare and contrast, that he wants us to grow from the children of the Old Testament into the New Testament, and then even down to Ellen White's time. And we see that with the issue of slavery, that it was this sympathy and compassion that was a test for them, whether they would have sympathy and compassion for the Black race. And it's the same now. It's whether we're going to have empathy and compassion for people who are not like us, who don't see things like us. And something I think that very hit me this week as well is, are we going to have sympathy and compassion for the conservatives? Because it's very easy now for us to get to the stage where that's how I was, how abhorrent that is, how awful that is to be a conservative Christian and have those dogmatic, extreme views of self-preservation and force and oppression and all those negative things that we're associating with conservatism now. And it's very easy to start looking at conservatives in a really bad light, instead of saying, you know what, we need to have compassion and sympathy with them too, because they're in the place we were in a year ago. And can we reach them where they are and pull them out of this pit before it's too late? So we're trying to educate ourselves to be more empathetic, to really understand how God operates and to see the mercy and the patience and the love of God, and how he's had mercy with us is the same mercy that we need to extend to others. And if anybody has any solutions to the problem, if anyone has any solutions to raising children, I'm more than open to listening, because this is a big challenge to undo the damage that we've done. So next time, we'll be looking at, whenever the next time is, we'll be looking at the Bible characters and how they went through that process of change, to see that what we can learn about how to get this empathy that we need. So let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for this time that we've been able to study together, and we thank you for expanding our minds to see more clearly your word, to understand more about our brothers and sisters, the Hebrews, what they went through, how they got to the place where they were worshipping these false gods, the practices they were doing, how close it was to the true path. We recognize today that many of us on different sides are using the same Bible, even the same Ellen White writings, to justify our positions, and yet our spirit isn't correct. We pray that you would change our hearts, that you would help us to have hearts of softness, kindness, mercy, empathy, compassion, and that you would truly pour that love into our hearts for one another and for those out there that don't see things the way we do. Help us, Lord, to educate others, to help them to have an increase of knowledge, that they might stand with us through this crisis that's coming. Please be with us now and bless the rest of our Sabbath. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you. God bless. Over to you.
When
Thank you for the study, Sister Amara.